All right, bang, bang. Today is Wednesday, October 28th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Very special guest today. I'm joined on Zoom by Dale Kaczmarek. He is a co-founder of the Ghost Research Society and a ghost hunter. Is that technically what you're called, Dale?
Well, I hate to use the word ghost hunter because it implies you're actually going around with a rifle and you're kind of hunting ghosts. So I kind of like the term either paranormal investigator or a psychic investigator or something like that, because it's more indicative of what I do. It's not always ghosts that I investigate as poltergeist phenomena. It can be hauntings. It can be other type of phenomena as well.
Interesting. And how'd you get into it? Can you take us to the beginning real quick? Sure.
Well, I guess the story begins when I was a child. My parents and grandparents telling me ghost stories when I was a youngster. And that's what really kind of got me involved in the paranormal. Later on, first of all, a lot of these ghost stories I was told were very local to the area I lived in, which was the south side of Chicago. So later on, I just decided to find out if some of these stories were actually true, if they were old wives' tales, urban legends, or whatever. And that's what really got me more involved, joining a group of like-minded people back in the mid-1970s, including a good friend of mine, Martin B. Ricardo. And then about a couple of years later, in 1977, we decided to start this group called the Ghost Trackers Club, which was what it was called back then. And it was just a very small group of people that we did investigations locally here in the Chicagoland area. We did research. This was long before the World Wide Web or the internet. There were bulletin board services out there, so it was really kind of hard to get information across. I opened up a P.O. box in Oak Lawn. I told people to send me their ghost stories, and I was really amazed by the amount of what today we would call snail mail of different types of reports and pictures, personal encounters that people had sent me throughout the years. So I worked as a research assistant for 5 years in the Ghost Trackers Club before Martin Ricardo wanted to do other endeavors at that point. So he gave me control of the group. We changed the name to Ghost Research Society in 1982, which is a bit more indicative of what we actually do, ghost research.
Wow. And do you remember exactly when you were a kid, like what was the main one that kind of got you interested in this stuff?
Oh, yeah. My very first ghost story that I can remember was Resurrection Mary. Resurrection Mary, the hitchhiking ghost story, for those that are not familiar with the story, started out in the mid-1930s of a girl hitchhiking back from what was then called the O'Henry Ballroom. It was now called the Willowbrook. Of course, the Willowbrook burned down several years ago. And she was seen hitchhiking back and forth between approximately where the Willowbrook Ballroom used to be and the main gates of Resurrection Cemetery. Now, some of the very first personal encounters that I came across started around 1937, 1939, 1940. And my mom and dad were dating in that time period, just before the Second World War. My dad was a merchant marine. I was very proud of my dad's service. And my mom and dad would, go out on a dinner, a movie, a date, theater, whatever the case may be. But always on the way home, they wanted to ride past, or at least my dad did, ride past Resurrection Cemetery looking for the ghost. He had seen the ghost. He was really the ghost hunter, I guess you could call him, of the family. And my mom was absolutely terrified. She didn't want any part of this at all. So I was told this story over and over again by my mom. My dad died pretty young, and my mom kind of raised me. And I heard this story over and over again. So that was one of the first stories, I think probably the first story I was actually told, besides some other, stories, for my grandparents who were from Poland. There was a ghost story of a woman seen near a bridge, and a man would approach the woman. She would ask help to get across the bridge, because she couldn't. So the guy would pick her up, carry her across the bridge. This is what my grandmother said. and drop her off on the other side. And then she would ask for direction. He would point in one direction. He would look back after giving directions. The girl was no longer there. And that kind of goes along with the story that, ghosts can't cross running water. Stories of Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman. He was safe once he got across the river and away from the headless ghost. But we know at least in my research, that ghosts actually have an affinity for running water. They're actually seen near running water. So a lot of other stories, my parents growing up on old-time radio shows that were pretty scary, turning out the lights and just listening to an old giant RCA big box cathedral type radio with the tubes. And so all this kind of had a real, kind of input to me to later explore this area as I grew up.
Interesting. Yeah. And I definitely want to get back to Resurrection Mary at some point, because I had her on my list because that's one of the most famous ones in Chicago for sure. But back to the Ghost Research Society here for a second. So you're almost going on 50 years. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, next year will be 46 years of research in the city, in the suburbs. That's professionally, I guess you could call that, more like intensive research. I mean, I've always had an interest going all the way back, like I said, to childhood. So I wasn't, exploring ghosts back then. I was just hearing about them, kind of getting my sights set on what I wanted to do later on in life. I was a chaplain's assistant in the Army from 1972 to 74. I often talked to the chaplains about ghosts, believe it or not, and some of them would tell me the stories. Some of the chaplains were a bit more pious. I was raised a Roman Catholic, so they didn't say much about that. But then some of the younger ones that were a little bit more down to earth would tell me stories. And this was back, from 72 to 74. So this is even before I started doing stuff when I got back out of the service. And like I say, just collecting stories, hearing about stories all around the world, all around the Chicagoland area. I think Chicago may be one of the most haunted cities in the world.
And how many people are in the Ghost Research Society now?
We have about 20 people in our core group that are basically, most of them are here in Chicagoland area. We have a number of state coordinators. We have an Indiana state coordinator, Missouri, California, Washington State, Kentucky, Connecticut, New Jersey, a few others that I can't remember offhand. So, they're kind of spread all over the country. But we have a good core group here in the Chicagoland area. We have regular bi-monthly meetings where we get together with the group. Of course, now we've been doing it with Zoom a lot, unfortunately. And then, trying to go out as best as we can, as safely as we can. We did some pretty interesting investigations this year. Very, very COVID-free, social distancing, wearing masks, and we all came back perfectly fine. So there's a way around it. You just have to be careful what you do. And you can investigate as long as you're not in a crowded location indoors without any masks.
Yeah, that's true. Wow. So that's fascinating. So you guys have these bi-monthly meetings, this ghost hunters group. And what's a meeting like? Like, you set it up and you run the meeting and you're like, hey, here's some possible spots that would be great to revisit. Is there, is it contentious? How does it go around here?
Well, it's generally a very open meeting. I like to, we have basically a whole list of officers in our group. We have a secretary that takes our meeting minutes and puts Mike Rosario. He does a very nice job. He's just earned his master's degree. He's going for his PhD now. So we got some pretty smart people. We got 3 registered nurses in our group from all over. So the meeting kind of starts off with just kind of rehashing some of the stuff we talked about in the last meeting. We then go into different things that I've collected, different interesting emails I've come across. We might go over some evidence that we've had that we picked up from our last investigations. We'll play them. And with Zoom, it's so much easier now. You can do video and all kind of stuff with that. we try to do that, and then we have a lot of open discussion about places we're going to be going to in the future. Setting up kind of a quorum, if you will, of people, and setting dates and times and locations where we can investigate. And we're already planning for 2021, and hopefully it'll be better than 2020 was. Normally we investigate about 20, 25, 30 locations in a year, and that's pretty much just in the spring and summer months and maybe early fall. So that's really a lot, considering that people do have a day job, so we have to kind of schedule these things on weekends. So it'd be pretty much almost every weekend, especially in 2019, from late February through middle of October, was completely booked up with investigations. We were very busy.
Wow. And do you have a day job currently?
No, I'm retired, actually. I worked for Certified Grocers for 32 and a half years at that location. It was a co-op grocery subsidiary, and kind of a warehouse job. And they eventually they closed down. I was kind of forced into retirement at age 56, which worked out very well for me because I was able to continue doing this full time at that point. I mean, before then it was really, weekends, vacation time, whatever I could do during the week. I was able to do so much more from that point, and really not that much loss. In fact, actually a gain in net income from what I was getting, pensions and retirement and everything else. So it worked out really well for me.
Interesting. And then when you did have that day job, was there people at your work or maybe your family members who were like, man, Dale's really into that stuff? That's kind of weird. It's kind of strange.
Well, I mean, most of them most of them knew that I was very serious about it. I've been on, so many television shows and television programs of very well-known places. I was with Oprah before she became Oprah. She had a show called AM Chicago. I've been on Sightings. I've been on Mysteries, Magic, and Codes, The Other Side, Discovery Channel episodes, Destination America. I have two segments that are currently being shown right now on the Travel Channel called The World's Most Unexplained on Sunday nights at 10 o'clock. The next one is actually going to be on Wednesday night at 10 o'clock on the Travel Channel, talking about the ghosts of the White House. The very first one I did earlier this year was talking about the Flight 191 crash in Chicago.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that helps that you're the legitimate paranormal guy. You're not just, you don't have like a fake site or anything like that. People see on Oprah.
No, I've been doing this for a long time, and I take what I do very seriously. Of course, we try to debunk whatever we can, evidence that we, can debunk if we can debunk it, replicate it if we can replicate it. But in most cases, what we try to do is to find out if there is such a thing as life after death. That's what really kind of got me involved too as well to this field, was not only to, kind of track down reports of ghost stories, but to prove the existence of life after death. And I figured if you could prove that there were ghosts, that there was a surviving personality in some way, shape, or form, every person that I've talked to in the paranormal, believe that there is an afterlife. There is, ghosts produce an energy. That energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It changes form. So the energy that we have in our bodies, a measurable energy, can actually, continue on after death. And that's what many people sometimes pick up with EMF devices and other equipment. So it was really my idea trying to get into to prove the existence of ghosts, and thereby proving the existence of life after death. We have come across, I have seen dozens and dozens of ghosts, shadow people. We've actually captured full-bodied apparitions. We have a whole section on our website devoted to spirit photographs. There's also a whole segment on there about investigations we've done across the country, and you can actually, people can go to that, scroll on down, which is a very long scroll that scrolls on forever, and you get down to wherever you want to click on it, and you can read the reports, what happened to us at the very end. You can actually see and hear the evidence we picked up. So we've been doing this for a long time, and I think that, as long as I can get around, I'll continue to do it.
Wow. And can you, and I guess one more thing about the club before we really get into it here is, do you just allow anybody in? Is it like a rigorous process to be allowed into the club, or how does that work?
No, anybody can actually join. I mean, all we ask is that you accept, you basically have an interest for it. I mean, you don't have to be totally gung ho, about it. I mean, you don't have to be a total believer in it. I mean, as long as you keep an open mind, it's all we ask is you keep an open mind to whatever's going on. I mean, I've had atheists in my group. I've had people who are agnostics, skeptics. And in some cases, they've actually became believers after being in my group and seeing things and experiencing things at locations. So all we ask is you keep an open mind. We ask people just to send, we have bylaws on our website, which are just standard bylaws about, what do's and don'ts and so forth. We just ask people to read the bylaws, send a picture of us, of yourself, a color, like a headshot. And then I will interview kind of one-on-one. Now, during COVID, basically it's one-on-one. Usually during a video face chat like this, just to kind of go over go over stuff in our bylaws and kind of get a feel for what the people that are joining expect from the group. And we always just give everybody an opportunity to join. Again, when we were having meetings down here in my basement, so to speak. I have a large meeting table. You might see I'm kind of surrounded by ghosts behind me and everything too. But we have to kind of limit, or at least used to have to kind of limit how many people I had in a group at any one given time, because only so many people can fit around my basement. So it's not that we're not taking everybody that we can, but we kind of have to kind of put a limit on it to eventually, so I don't overcrowd my basement, but we give everybody a fair opportunity to join the group, whoever wants to join.
Interesting. And can you explain the prep and planning a little bit that goes into a day of the field? Like, what do we need to do? Say we're going tomorrow and we're like, hey, we have a possible paranormal activity at this house. What goes into the night before and the day of?
Well, actually, maybe even weeks before that, what I'll be doing is doing research on the area, finding out if I have books. I have a very extensive library of thousands of books that have literally overflowed my office into the utility room, into the furnace room. So it's kind of like just going kind of crazy. So I'll look to see if I have any books about a specific location, if it's a public place. If it's a private location, private home or private business, I will try to do as much research as I can on that area and that building to find out what may have happened that may have precipitated the ghost story. I mean, it's not always that houses are always haunted. It can be the property that the building is on. We call it stigmatized property. There may have been, say, an Indian massacre. There may have been a murder. Maybe somebody was buried in the basement, something crazy like that. So we try to, talk to police. We go to historical societies. We go on the internet. We try to find as much information as we can. We even talk to neighbors, older neighbors in the neighborhood, which are a very good source of information, by the way. It's kind of weird knocking on someone's door and then saying, well, your neighbors have ghosts, but sometimes it's just as simple as that. So we get all this out of the way initially to find out what's going on and kind of get us a feel for what we're getting involved with. And then I would interview the people over the phone if it's like a private home or private business. And this is where it gets very interesting, because when I bring my team in, they have no idea what's going on. Like these TV shows that you see on TV that everybody knows before they get there what's going on. Well, I don't tell my team anything except they know they're going to a place that's allegedly haunted. So I keep them, kind of like ice cold. So that way there's no preconceived notions of what's going on. People don't all congregate, say, in the basement or the creepy attic or something like that. They just go around with their equipment. We kind of do it in three phases. Phase one, they walk around in teams of two. One has some equipment. The other one has a notebook, usually with a floor plan. They're marked on the floor plan where they pick up anything with their equipment, their own feelings, their senses. And then we'll sit down in phase 2, and before the client tells us, our group, what's going on, we tell the client what we have picked up. And that's scientific, because that way, again, you're not putting thoughts in somebody's head of what the client has said. And then it's amazing. Don't tell me, I have no idea how it happens, but at least 85, 90% of the time, we hit the proper rooms. I mean, we know where it's happening. I mean, I usually kind of take myself out of that phase of the investigation, because again, I don't want to be leading people to a specific location. I mean, I'm the one that interviews them, so I kind of like back off, but then later I get involved with the investigation part. So then the client will tell our group, and then our group will tell the client what they picked up. And then you'll often see the client's eyes get real large, because, oh, wow, you picked up the same thing that I'm picking up in the same corner of my bedroom, or wherever it may be. And then we'll go to phase 3, which then is setting up equipment, cameras, different devices, all types of paranormal equipment in locations that were kind of called hotspots that we both hit on. And then also places where perhaps we missed that maybe wasn't active when we were there, but the client has had experiences. So we'll also want to put equipment there. We'll run some EVP sessions, other experiments, and try to get paranormal evidence of that. We later then compile the evidence along with the reports from everybody, personal encounters, whatever evidence we picked up. And then I'll make another appointment, usually with the client, to sit down with the client and then go over the information, give them a copy of all that, give them a copy of the report, give them a copy of all the evidence, and see where they want to go from here. Now, a lot of times, people that have haunted houses are more curious of what's going on rather than they really want the thing to stop. They want, they want the ghost to leave. Sometimes they think they know who the ghost is. It might be Uncle Henry or Aunt Marge or something like that, and they say, "Oh, okay, if that's who it is, that's okay. They can stick around. You don't have to get them out." Other people are just terrified. They just want, whatever it is to leave. And I'll always say, right off the bat when I talk to people, I'm not a ghostbuster. I don't go out there and try to get the ghost out. We don't do saging. We don't do house blessings. We don't do clearings. We're there to compile evidence, to try to debunk, look for natural explanations if we can. And then if the client still needs something after that, then I can suggest people that I know who are highly qualified that can help them.
I love that process, because, they're just, big thing when it comes to this is there are a lot of skeptics. So you kind of going through that and you being the only one that knows, that makes a lot of sense. And that sounds like the best way to do it. So that's pretty cool. Now, as far as
the psychics that I've worked with actually in the past, just to kind of give you an idea, one of them was Pat Schenberg, who was a past president of the Illinois Society for Psychic Research. He was a gifted healer as well as a psychic and clairvoyant. I worked with a woman, I won't give her last name, but she was known as her first name was Trudy. She actually worked with police on missing persons cases. She worked on the Atlanta child murder cases. She also worked with area police on the Janine Nicarico and Melissa Ackerman murder cases, 2 little girls that later Brian Dugan was convicted of those murders and many others. And I worked with her on several occasions too. So the people I've worked with are not charlatans. They're not frauds or fakes. They're people that have a background in police, have a background in psychics, and in both those cases, they don't have websites, they don't have blogs, they don't have Facebook pages, they don't promote themselves, they don't do psychic fairs. I mean, they're legitimately legit psychics, and that's where the difference comes in sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I could, credibility is monstrous in your business for sure. And as far as equipment goes and detecting, paranormal, what do you value the most? Is it a temperature gauge? Is it the metal crossers? Is it sound? What do you really like to see in an exploration, I guess?
Well, actually, we have devices that pick up everything from EMF fluctuations, in other words, deviation in electromagnetic fields, which are like K2 meters. One of my favorite tools is the tri-field natural EM meter that we actually use. It's one of the best EMF devices in the market, probably is the best. You won't see a lot of these TV paranormal shows use them because it hardly ever goes off. And that's good. I mean, when you get devices that go off all the time, you're looking for false positives, you're looking at the environmental, if it's in the wiring, something like that's setting it off, especially if you're indoors. This device is not actually sensitive at all to AC fields. It will not be set off by anything inside the environment of a home. If it does go off, then you really got to scratch your head. What's setting this device off? And we've had times that this went off for no reason. Actually had some huge spikes. We also use equipment that picks up temperature. Obviously, we have a thermal tablet that picks up more contact readings than anything else. But if the ghost has a substantive mass of some way, shape, or form, that this device can pick up on, it'll show up as a figure. We also have a SLS camera, which is the structured light sensor device. You might have seen them on TV that put out an invisible field of thousands of dots, and if something shows up in that field, that mapped out area, they show up as a stick figure. We've actually had those devices go off a lot and actually interact with us, which is just absolutely crazy. So we have a lot of visual stuff. We use a lot of night shot cameras, full spectrum cameras. We use a lot of real-time devices to get responses in real time. We'll use the Ghost Box. We'll use the Obelisk. We'll use the Mini Portal. I have an AM sweepers. I have one application that I'm very confident works really well is the Phasma Box. And we have actually got just incredible EVPs and direct responses and full sentences coming up right after we ask questions. We also have devices that pick up
full sentences, huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Give you an example. We were at the Elgin Casket Factory, which is in Elgin, Illinois. It's a place that used to have sell caskets, obviously. Around Halloween, they dressed it up as a kind of a scary, walk through haunted house that people can get the bejesus scared out of them. And so we were using this SLS camera, which again picks up, stick figures and different, things that show up in a mapped out area. There was a fuse box on the wall that was not hooked up to anything at all. It was there for effect. It had like dripping blood out of it and so forth. And one of my members who was using the device said, "Well, look at that. There's a figure touching that box. He's right on it." So immediately I said, "Well, if you're next to that box, why don't you turn that switches on?" Which I know, doesn't hook up to anything. I said, "Turn on one of those switches." Immediately, the response that came through the box was, "It doesn't work."
Wow.
Which it's true, it doesn't work. We were at a cemetery in Goshen, Indiana called McConaughey Cemetery. We were investigating as part of a meet and greet. There was two smaller cemeteries on the property. And all there was a sign. There were no tombstones at all. So we were sitting here, we asked a question by the sign, "How many graves are here?" So there were no markers. A few seconds later, a voice comes through. It says, "More than 100.
Wow. That's
I could go on and on and on of direct responses, full sentences that come through there. And it's just amazing. We were at the Battlefield Cemetery, which is part of the Black Hawk Wars up in around Kent, which is northwest of the city of Chicago. And this was a skirmish that claimed the lives of 12 militiamen, and there was 12 markers lined up there. So we were doing an EVP session right there. And we turned on the Phasma box, and sometimes a lot of garbage comes through, and sometimes we get good responses. It really depends. All of a sudden, out of clear blue sky, it says, "How do you do?" I said, well, how do you do? And then right after that, it said 12 remains. The remains of 12 people, which were right next to us. They were lined up in a row, 12 tombstones. And the gentleman we were investigating with, Dan Norville, who runs a group called the Dan Norville Project, the expression on his face was priceless when he heard that come through the Phasma box. So we use devices that pick up temperature. We actually have a device that picks up smell, picks up hydrogen sulfide gas. A lot of homes, I won't say a lot of homes, I would say some homes we've investigated have reported the awful smell of like rotten eggs. And it's not sewer gas. I mean, we can pretty much tell which the sewer gas and whatever. But hydrogen sulfide smells just like rotten eggs. And sometimes we've noticed this in homes that are, a little bit more, negative than we would like to get involved with. So we've actually picked up a hydrogen sulfide detector that actually picks up so many parts per million in an environment. And we've never had it go off, but we have that capability as well. So we have, the sight, the sounds, the smell, the feelings, pretty much, we have laser grids that we can set up that show, if something breaks through the beams of the laser grid, you will actually see a shadow. Our newest laser grid is called the GS2 laser grid. It actually has a little screen on top of it, about this big or so. And if something goes through the pattern, it will actually show you on the screen the configuration of what just went through, whether it be in the configuration of a man, an animal, or whatever. So you can record that with another camera and then play it back later. And we just came back from 2 really important investigations this year. In June, we were down in Stones River Battlefield in Middle Tennessee. We went to Old South Pittsburgh Hospital, Hales Bar Marina, and Brushy Mountain Prison, all in Tennessee. Our second major trip was in August. We went for 4 days in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, including a trip to Pennhurst Asylum, also the Jenny Wade House and the old orphanage. We actually had some of these devices react very strangely on the battlefield. The GS2 laser grid was showing something appearing in the beams, and it just wouldn't go away. And it was just like standing there, and we couldn't figure out what it was. It was just totally
Bizarre.
amazing.
Wow. And you brought it up too. What do you think about these ghost hunter TV shows?
Well, I mean, I will say one thing, they have drawn a lot of people into the paranormal. I will give them that credit. So many people that have watched that have decided after watching those shows, hey, it's something I'd like to try. I'd like to get involved with. So they join a group, maybe they start their own group. What I will say is a little bit bad perhaps about some of those TV shows is that their protocols and methodologies are completely flawed. They encourage people to go into rooms by themselves, which is absolutely nothing you ever should try by yourself. We always have the partner team. Somebody goes along with you. Even if it's going to the washroom, somebody stands outside the door. We've been in buildings that are absolutely huge. If you go somewhere by yourself and you fall down a set of stairs, no one's going to know where you're at. You can be lying there for hours. And the other reason, if you're by yourself and you see something, it's just you, not your partner that may have also seen it as well. So a lot of ways, what they do, some of the ways that they hold the digital recorders in their hands instead of putting them on a flat surface, you can actually impart noise to a recorder by moving it around in your hand, not doing it purposely, but just by moving it around unless you hold it very still. And I don't suggest people doing that. There are a lot of their methods in the way they use equipment, unfortunately, and in some cases, unfortunately, they do fake some of their evidence too, I'm sure. But Yeah, I mean, there are good and bad. I mean, I watch these shows pretty much for entertainment purposes only. I watch them for really two reasons, for where they go and what kind of equipment they're using, because there is always new equipment coming out all the time. Currently, I have over $14,000 worth of ghost hunting gear that I've collected over the years that we use, and very, very scientific stuff that you can't find anymore. Places like I bought a lot of equipment from a place called Digital Dowsing, digitaldowsing.com. Bill Chappell was really a genius in devising devices specifically meant for ghost research and collecting of evidence. When I started, there was nothing like that. I started out with a cassette tape recorder, a 35 millimeter camera, and my EMF device was a compass. Because a compass should point to a true magnetic north unless it comes in contact with a strong magnetic field. So, I mean, throughout the years, you know, we adapted equipment that wasn't necessarily used for the purpose of, you know, ghost research to use in our field. And then now there are so many different websites out there. Dave Giuliano runs a great website called Ghost Hunting Store. That you can purchase a lot of great stuff from his site. I've picked up a lot of really great stuff from him, and I've worked with him several times. He's a great guy. He has one of the greatest websites, I think, called Shadowlands, called theshadowlands.net. It's a listing all across the country of places that you can go to see ghost locations.
Wow. And what about Ouija boards and like psychics and fortune tellers? Do you tend to buy into that, or?
Well, Ouija boards, basically, Ouija is actually two words. It's the French and the German word for yes, we, and ja, ja for German. So it's Ouija, actually. What I tell people about the Ouija board is that you should probably stay away from it. Now, the Ouija board is just a piece of compressed wood. It's what you're trying to do with the board, however, that could be dangerous. You are opening doors, you're opening up dimensions to the other side, you're communicating with spirits, and there is a proper way to open and close a session. Now, you know, on the bottom of the board, there's a big word that says goodbye. So you're supposed to, you know, close the board by saying goodbye. But what often happens is when people, they either have obscenities start coming through, maybe they'll see shadows in the room, they'll hear noises, maybe the planchette will start moving by itself, and they get freaked out and they just leave. And what they've done is they've opened that door, but they never closed it. And in my opinion, what happens is that a lot of times, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
A lot of times that what people do with these Ouija boards is that they never close the doors, and what happens is that later on they have problems in their homes or their businesses or whatever their case may be. So I always tell people, I don't even use Ouija boards. I mean, I did it one time as an experiment for a television show that was actually hosted by, of all people, Mitch Pileggi, who was the guy from the X-Files, the bald-headed Mulder's boss. And we went to a place called the Excalibur in Chicago on Dearborn Street, and I never touched the board. Other people did, but I was there with equipment to see if we could pick up anything. And of course, nothing really happened. These things don't always happen on cue when you want them to. So, I mean, I always tell people, be careful what you get involved with. Psychics, seances, Ouija boards, automatic writing, rituals, smudging, cleansings, things of that nature. I've seen so many people go to a location where there's activity. And what I often suggest, now it's just my suggestion, is that when you start a group or you become part of a group, you should choose a path. You're either going to be in there for the research, the investigation, the scientific end, or you're going to be on the psychic end. The psychic end could be more intuitive, it could be more in, you know, cleansing and removing stuff. You shouldn't try to do both. That's my personal opinion. But a lot of people do both. and they may go to locations where there is activity going on, and they'll start sprinkling holy water all over the place. Well, I mean, holy water is really a Catholic, ideal, right? So think of it, if the ghost is not Catholic, they're going to say, "What are you doing? What, you just throwing water at me?" I mean, think of it just if it's a surviving personality. The same thing with smudging, which is sage. You're burning sage, right? And you're kind of using a feather to go around, and you're clearing out the room with sage. Well, that's a Native American Indian custom. So what if the ghost is not a Native American Indian? What they're going to say again? What are you doing with that sage? Now, I mean, it can, in some cases, I believe, clear out some energy that might be kind of bad. But it's surely not going to get rid of a ghost. I mean, ghosts have their own personality, if they and their own free will. If no manner of speaking, if they don't want to leave, there's not much you're going to be able to do to convince them to leave. Now, most ghosts, don't realize that they have passed on because of violent or untimely death. So in some cases, if you're able to convince the ghost that they're dead, that they've died, and to move on, to the other side, reach out to friends and loved ones on the other side who have passed over. Very often, that can help. Go to the light. You've always heard that. Go to the light. It's like in the Poltergeist. Remember that little tiny psychic woman? Go to the light. Yeah. There's peace and serenity in the light. That's a kind of squeaky voice. That's my impression of her. But yeah, think of it this way, and this is my theory. Now, it might be totally off base on this, but this is my theory. We know what ghosts look like, okay, because we've seen them. We've seen pictures of them. We've seen videos. We've seen them in books, magazines, internet, whatever, okay? We have no idea how we appear to a ghost until we become
a good point.
Ghost. So, I mean, for all we know, because we're still a living person, we might look like a huge white light of energy. So by telling the spirit to go to the light, you might be telling that spirit to go and attach itself to the nearest person it sees, or hang around that person, because that's the white light, okay? Now, you've heard of people going, near-death experiences, they go through a tunnel of white light, they see a brilliant white light. That may be, but that's not the same as trying to tell a ghost to go to the light. It's better off, I like to say, if we use psychics. I've been involved with psychics when they've tried to clear homes. I've kind of stepped back and I've watched them work, and we have our equipment there, and they just try to convince them that they're dead, to move on, to reach out to friends and loved ones that might be waiting on the other side. And then usually, not all the time, but usually, the activity is gone.
Now, do you think most ghosts are evil, or they just kind of exist? Like, what do you think? Are they mostly evil?
No, I've never come across a negative ghost in over 45 years of research. Now, that could be twofold. Number one, first of all, if that is the case, if there are, demonic entities or negative spirits, it's very, very, very minuscule. It's probably less than 2% of all the cases that have been reported around the world. Also, we screen our cases very carefully. I go through a rigorous interview process. Of course, I like to have the people tell their story in their own words first, and then I go back and I got 3 or 4 pages of questions that I ask. Was this here but when you before you moved in? Did somebody use a seance, a Ouija board, automatic writing? Was there satanic activity? Do you know of anybody putting pentagrams on the ground and candles and chanting, and there are a lot of crazy people in this world. So if you can answer no to all those, then I feel safe to bring my team in. Now, if I find out that, and I've interviewed, literally thousands and thousands of people. I've probably investigated about 4,100 cases in a little more than 45 years. And, literally, I can get a pretty good feel for what's going on before we're even there, just by what the people are telling me, what has happened in the home, either now or prior to them moving in. And so why would I want to bring my team, or any team for that matter, into a place that has, a demon or demonic or something very negative? I mean, I always say, if that's the case, first thing you probably should do is you probably should talk to the clergy. Get a priest, get a minister, get a rabbi, come in there and pray, do whatever to try to clear the home. There are ways doing that, but again, they kind of do the same thing I've kind of preached against. They'll come in, they'll sprinkle holy water, they'll come in, they'll burn incense. It's all the same thing, but I think more than that, I think prayer is what causes spirits to move on to the other side. Pray for people that may be trapped here. Oh boy, I was often told that there was a heaven, there was a hell, and there was a purgatory. There was something in between. And I said, well, what's that? And a priest said, well, trying to bring it down to my level, like I was 6, 7-year-old, he said, well, purgatory is where you're not good enough for heaven, but you're not bad enough for hell. So you're kind of like in between. You're waiting to be judged, And maybe if you haven't repented, people will pray for you, and then you'll move on to the light, to the other side, to God, to heaven, whatever your religious belief might be. I said, okay, I wasn't going to dispute that, being a 6 or 7-year-old, and there's a very, as an adult telling me this, okay? But when you look at it now from the standpoint of ghost research, purgatory makes perfect sense. The spirits that you contact, they're not in heaven, they're not in hell, they're in between. They're earthbound. For whatever reason, they're sticking around, usually because they haven't realized that they have passed on. Sometimes they don't want to move on. They kind of will themselves to stay here. Maybe they want to help people. Maybe there's unfinished business, so many dozens of reasons. And that made perfect sense now.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's kind of a good way to put it. Now, obviously, you said you never take on demonic, missions, but is there ever a time like you've been scared? What's the most scared you've ever been? Is there any place you won't go back to?
No, I actually not. First of all, I should probably say nothing really frightens me. And that's because before we go there, we have a pretty good idea what's going on. We research the area, we talk to people. If we know of other research groups that have been there, I'll reach out to them. What happened when you were there? Was there any type of negativity? Was there any scratching? I've never been scratched. And that's crazy. If you look at these TV shows, somebody's scratched every week. I've been doing it for 45 years. I've never been scratched. Now, I've been touched, okay? I've been poked in the back. I've been pushed slightly, but I've never been scratched, okay? I've never been, a violent attack. And what was the question again? I kind of got off track.
What was it? Is there any place you won't go back to?
Oh, okay. No, I've been to locations that are that are very scary and not so scary. Also, with the whole idea of knowing what's going on ahead of time, you have a good idea what to expect. But I always say expect the unexpected, because things can happen that were not expected. We were doing an investigation in a private home. I can tell the person's name because we were actually on TV. It was on Discovery Channel, called Real Ghost Hunters, back in 1998 or 1999. And she was experiencing all kinds of things, lights going off and on. Her dogs and cats were reacting to stuff. She actually had somebody pull the covers off her legs, scream in her ear. She woke up one evening and saw a gentleman in a blue uniform with buttons straight down, almost like a Civil War outfit, kind of leaning against the door jamb, kind of looking at it. It's kind of a shadow person. She got up, she looked back, turned away, looked back, it was still there. So she called us to come out there, and we were out there several times. We picked up some crazy stuff. Now, I remember, this was back in 1990. This was just about when I got my first night shot camera. And being a kind of a geek with that and not knowing better, okay, now this is something that's just a learning thing, I always thought that orbs were something that they were ghosts. So all these orbs we were picking up on the night shot is, they got to be spirits. Well, I later find out that they're most likely dust, and they can be bugs, they can be water droplets, all different things. The Discovery Channel decided to follow us out there. Now, they were more interested in how we set up, how we go about, what we do, et cetera, to interview her, interview us. And we had all our equipment set up. We had their cameras up there on the upstairs, which is where the bedrooms were. We had them piggyback, literally back to back, one facing one hallway, one facing the other hallway, one facing into the bathroom. So we had the entire floor upstairs covered. They turned off all the air conditioning, all the, anything that would make any sound, and shut all the windows. So it got kind of warm in there, because this was in summer, this was in July. And even after an hour or so, there was still nothing. Then, all of a sudden, something had never been reported happened. We started hearing and recording footsteps upstairs in the north bedroom, and which is where she had all her encounters. Now, we got the camera right there. We got a monitor right there. We're looking at the monitor. There's nobody up there. Nothing going on. Every time we heard, and this is actually, you can see this on my website. I think it's on my website. Every time there was a noise, the drapes moved like this, but the windows were closed. And you actually hear people shuffling their feet. Now, about that time, the producer, who was a female, and you actually hear her in the background. If you're able to find this thing, you can probably Google it and probably find it somewhere. You hear this woman say, "What's going on, Dale?" And she was getting scared because this wasn't supposed to happen. And I said, "I don't know. There's never been a report of anybody walking around." And we had an oscilloscope which picks up sound, and it's just going crazy, like there was an earthquake going on, literally. So what happened is I sent to my team, when it finally stopped, I sent two of my team up there to check it out, to look around. Windows were closed. And I said, while you're up there, shuffle your feet around the floor. Trying to see if those sounds we just picked up. And so then we had three people from the production crew: the producer, a sound man, and a cameraman. Now, the sound man was a skeptic. Oh, no. There's a dog up there. Both dogs are right here. And they're right here. That can here. This guy upstairs on the bed, and he's listening to it with headphones. Now, this is kind of the funny part, and I'll leave you with this little section here, but I always told Danica, who was the woman that was having all these issues, while we're here, since they interact with you, call out to them. And she opened up the door, unbeknownst to me, and she got a kind of a high-pitched, squeaky voice, and she opened up the door and she goes, "Hello." And this guy's face, all the the blood drained from his face. He got pale. He goes, "Did you hear that?" I said, "That was just Danica. I didn't tell her to do it just now. I said always to reach out." And from that point forward, the rest of the time, he didn't say another word. But the whole point of the story is just to expect the unexpected. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, the ghosts are not going to have an MO. In many cases they do, but they can deviate from that MO. You know, they can do other things besides that. You know, I mean, usually movements of objects are not often associated with ghosts, they're associated with poltergeist activity, which is the German word for noisy ghost. And it's often created by the mind of an adolescent, usually a female between the ages of, say, 12, 13 upwards, so it's going through puberty, that has chemical changes within her body. They're often introverts that keeps up pent up. They may have a lot of peer pressure in school. And they keep all this energy kind of bottled up inside themselves. If you ever saw the movie Carrie with Sissy Spacek, perfect example, all of a sudden this stuff starts coming out, movements of objects, things flying around. It's called telekinesis, mind over matter. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes maybe a spirit might be able to, you know, cause things to appear and disappear. They're called apports, A-P-P-O-R-T. Well, something will appear here, disappear. You might put your keys in the middle of the dining room table. You go back 5 minutes later, they're gone. You can't find them. Later on, you come back, they're on the kitchen dining room table. Nobody's touched them. Things like that we can't explain.
Interesting.
But so it's always to expect the unexpected.
Now, is there a certain Chicago site or a certain Chicago haunting that you get asked about the most?
Bachelors Grove, probably. Bachelors Grove Cemetery is a small abandoned cemetery on 143rd Street, just east of Ridgeland Avenue in the town of Midlothian, directly across from the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve. It's a cemetery that dates back to the 1830s. It was founded by a group of German immigrants from Bremen, Germany, that came in here in the 1830s that purchased land about $1.25 an acre. In 1864 or thereabouts, they purchased the deed from a man named John Everdeen towards the end of the Civil War, and they deeded this property for a cemetery. Now, for decades and decades, maybe many decades, I won't say hundreds, many decades, there was a road that went right past the cemetery. They used to call it Bachelors Grove Road. But somewhere back, I think around the 1980s or so, they closed that road off when they built a new turnpike. So many people are wondering, what's the cemetery doing in the middle of the woods? Well, it wasn't in the middle of the woods. It was right on the main road at one time, but technology kind of bypassed it. People have seen and reported all types of activity, from phantom dogs to a phantom house that people have seen, a white house with white wooden pillars, a porch swing, and even a light burning dimly in one window. The unusual thing about this house is as you walk toward it, it appears to get smaller and smaller and vanishes from sight. People have seen a woman dressed in white carrying a baby in her arms, often on moonlit nights. Red, almost like a Roman candle or a skyrocket, kind of zooming up and down the main trail. Back in 1970, a Joliet man named Jack Hermansky claimed he saw blue balls of light about the size of a soccer ball, kind of pulsating. He would reach out to touch them, they disappeared. He turned around, they were behind him. He then turned around, reached out to touch them, they disappeared. He played tag the entire night, could never get closer than a couple of feet. About a year later, a woman in 1971 named Denise Travers claimed to have put her hand directly through one of these lights. She claimed to have felt no heat, no cold, no sensation whatsoever. We were there and we've investigated. The first investigation we did was back in 1982 with a professional psychic from Morris, Illinois, which is way far south. She's never been to Bachelors Grove before. And some of the things that she told me, which we have on videotape and audio tape, is just completely amazing. When she first walked in, she points over to the left. She said that there's a woman standing there by this grave. And first thing I ask is, like, can you get a name for me? She says, strange sounding name like Dora or Dorma, Meyer or Myers, which is pretty close. It's not like, Carol Smith or something like that. And so, I walked over there. We all walked over there. We, put the camera down and we're looking down, and there's a family plot there that has Newman as the family plot. That's the married name, and below it, it has the name Dora, which is not a very common name. Okay, Dora. We later determined her maiden name is Meyer. Now, how are these things possible? I mean, that's what psychics, that's why I love working with psychics. And basically, she didn't know any of the history of this location, prior to going there, especially she's never been there and memorized all those tombstones. I've been there so many times, I can say, somebody says, well, where's this tombstone? I say, yes, over here, yes, over here, because I've been there so much. But a person that was there the very first time could never have had that kind of experience. Now, in 1991, in August, we did a full-fledged investigation, with members of our group, where I gave everybody maps. They walked in teams of 2. I kind of drew like a route that you want to go past these locations, mark anything that you pick up with your own sensation, your own, because, number one piece of equipment is your physical body, any equipment you bring along. And then, when everybody got done, we compared the maps. And several people had marked this checkerboard tombstone that has no name on it. And so we went back into those and 2 other locations where a lot of people put little X's on the map to do some further experiments there. One of our members, her name was Jude Huff, had asked me about a week before how to use infrared film, because we were using 35mm cameras back in 1991. That was before digital came out. And I told her all the safeguards you need to do. And she bought a camera. She loaded it with black and white, high-speed infrared film and shot it at 400 ASA, which is a fast, high-speed film, a fast, high-speed film setting. She snapped pictures all over the place, including that checkerboard tombstone. Now, when she looked at her photographs initially, she didn't see anything. She just didn't see anything. She just went through them real quick, okay, nothing, and didn't capture anything, which you don't always do. I've captured a lot of stuff, and I had some good examples of me capturing stuff, spirits, shadow figures with my infrared film. You can see them on my website. Go to the photography page. It's amazing. Well, when she looked at them weeks later, you looked down with a magnifying glass, something stood out to her on one particular photograph. All the way to the far left, you see the tombstone, you see a tree right there, and sitting on that tombstone is a woman. Now, a woman dressed in a full-length white gown, down to her ankles, with long brown hair, staring off in profile. Nobody was dressed like that in our group. Nobody that came into the cemetery that day was dressed. This was in the middle of summer. People had shorts on. They had blue jeans. They had tank tops. They had short sleeve shirts. And nobody saw this. I was there, so I know this was not a fake. And because it was a 35mm, it shows up on the negative. So we actually have a negative film strip that we can show, which is harder to debunk than digital, because digital can be photoshopped so easily. Here we have something that shows up on the negative. This was shown to people in Kodak in Rochester, New York. They could not ascertain how that got on the film. Parts of the body of the woman are actually semi-transparent. Her knees and her head, you can see trees and bushes through. Now, this was shown to and this was displayed on.
And this is on your website, Dale?
Yes, it is. It's on a website. It's also it's on the section that I talk about, the local haunts section. There's also in the investigative section of the page too, the GRS investigations. I did a segment for the Discovery Channel called Phantom Photographs, which that was discussed among many others. Now, we had this gentleman from Kodak that was sent the original picture, one of the original prints. They weren't going to, he wasn't going to send the negative, because if they lose the negative, it's gone forever. And he looked at that photograph, and again, you might be able to find that segment called Phantom Photographs Discovery Channel. He said that he thought it was a real person because it was casting a shadow. Well, the guy was not a very good, photographic expert, so to speak. And that's why we say there are no experts in the field, even in ghost hunting. If you look very carefully at the image, and when you get a chance to look at it, you'll see that the woman and the tombstone are already in the shadows. Okay, the trees, you know, she's completely in the shadows. So she wasn't casting a shadow, she was in the shadows. And I wasn't able to say anything more about that. I wish I would have had a chance to respond, because I would have pointed that out immediately to debunk what he had just said. It's one of the greatest pieces of evidence we've captured so to date. It's been in the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune. I've written 6 books on the subject. It's in 2 of my books on Windy City ghosts, and also in my field guide to spirit photography. You know, I mean, people have asked me more probably about Bachelors Grove than perhaps any other place that I know, next to maybe Resurrection Cemetery, because they're so well known. Resurrection Cemetery, you really have just the hitchhiking ghost story, but variations of that. But Bachelors Grove, all those different stories I told you, and dozens of others that people have seen, including 2 Cook County forest rangers on routine patrol going past the cemetery one evening back in the 70s, claimed to have seen a farmer and a horse dragging a plow emerge from the lagoon and cross directly in the path of their approaching vehicle on the Midlothian Turnpike, 143rd Street, and disappeared into Rubio Woods. Like he was just plowing land. He was semi-transparent. You could see right through him. The headlights didn't even cast a shadow. They went right through, hit the other side of the street. And the forest rangers are like, you know, like, what did we just see? They never officially reported that because of fear of being laughed at or ridiculed. But I found that out. You know, I have run into, you know, forest rangers and park officials and cemetery curators, and came out a lot of different stories, and that was one of them that really amazed me. Now, you know, was there a farmer somewhere back in the 1890s or 1880s that was plowing land out there, which was a lot of farmland? There was a big homestead. Bachelors Grove wasn't just a cemetery. It was a complete settlement called Bachelors Grove, because many of the settlers were initially bachelors when they first came over. Was he out there plowing land, and perhaps maybe a bee stung the horse, or the horse got skittish and ran headlong into the lagoon, which was there at the time, because how the plow is, you kind of strapped over your shoulders and you kind of pull it along. You couldn't get disentangled, and the horse and the plow dragged all of them under, and they all drowned. And maybe 106 years, 107 years later, people began to see this farmer still plowing land out there. It's one of the most amazing sightings out there at Bachelors Grove.
And do you believe in Resurrection Mary?
I believe there's something going on there. I don't know who she is. I've done a lot of research. I've talked to dozens of people. I've talked to people. I've had direct eyewitness accounts, not friends of friends of friends, but actually first-person accounts. I believe that something happened along Archer Avenue. Now, if you go into the urban legend, or the legends about Resurrection Mary, it gets a bit confusing, because some people said that her name was Mary Bergovi, which was a Polish name. And Mary Bergovi died not hitchhiking, along Archer Avenue, but she was ballroom hopping in downtown Chicago with 3 of her friends, her boyfriend in the front, who was the driver of the car, and her 2 friends in the back seat. And they were coming from each type of ballroom clothes. They went to another ballroom, and they went to another ballroom, just wanted to keep dancing all night. This was in the 1930s, 1933. And as they were coming around Lake Street near Wacker Drive, it's kind of a dangerous kind of little S-curve or curve right there, and they were going a bit too fast. And this is documentation. I have the obituary and the newspaper article, that they actually struck a elevated L-track support, and she was thrown right through the windshield and died on impact. She was buried in Resurrection Cemetery in section MM along 79th Street, in her dance gown, dance shoes, small shell, and a cocktail purse, according to the Satella Funeral Home, who remembers that and has it documented. And soon after that, people began seeing an image of a girl. Why she'd be seen along Archer is interesting. I have a theory on that too, I'll tell you in a second, but you would think she'd be seen near her death site, which has never been seen there to my knowledge. Now, she was buried in section MM. Now, I've been told, and I know it's a fact, that that's one of the oldest, if not the oldest sections in Resurrection Cemetery. And they were called term graves. Now, I don't know if you know what term grave is, but they're only, usually when you buy a plot back then, they were good for 20, 30, 50 years or something like that. And if you didn't renew them, then what would happen, they didn't bury people in burial vaults back then. They just lowered the casket in the ground, and 20, 30 years, the wood from would be rotted away, and everything would just kind of be turned to dust. What would happen if you didn't renew those graves, that people would be buried right on top of you. And it's a strange thing, but they eventually stopped that, and they have what they call perpetual care. Maybe that's part of the reason that she's been seen. Now, there are Bergovies buried out there, and there is a Mary Bergovie grave, but she died in 1920, so I assume that's her mother. The 1933 Bergovie tombstone was removed by the cemetery because of people coming out there after a Southtown Economist article came out in October 23rd of 1983. It would have been 50 years after the death of Mary Bergovie, that went into every detail about that incident. It gave her house number. It gave the occupants in the vehicle. It gave the address of the funeral home she was embalmed. It gave the plot, the section, the grave number where she was buried. And that's caused people to come out there in the middle of the night and unfortunately try to dig her up to see if she still had the shawl and the purse and the, whatever, and the dancing shoes, which is crazy because, the corpse, it's not a walking corpse, it's a spirit. So they removed the marker, and it's kind of hard to find. They may have removed all the markers. I was out there trying to find some of my relatives, my aunts who were died in the 1920s, 1930s, and they do have markers on them. So they, fortunately, they were able to save those graves, but I wasn't able to find hers. But yeah, it's one of these stories that has hung on for so many decades. And like I said, the first story I heard, the first story my dad heard, my dad being a big believer, not just wanting to hear the story, but wanting to see for himself if there was actually a ghost hitchhiking along Archer Avenue, bringing his girlfriend, later became my mom, along with him. But so many people, including Sean and Jerry Late, a Southside couple who later became good friends with, were coming back from their mother-in-law's house in September of somewhere, I can't remember the date. It was in September of 1970s, I believe. The exact year kind of escapes me, but they were coming back from their mother-in-law's house. It was dark. They were traveling east-northeasterly on Archer Avenue when they saw a woman standing in the middle of the road between the double yellow lines, getting ready to cross from left to right towards the cemetery. But normally when you're crossing the road, you're kind of looking both directions for traffic. She was kind of staring directly headed towards the cemetery. So Sean got in the far right lane, kind of sped up. And about that time, she darted across traffic without stopping. Sean said he feared that he was unable to stop, that he was going to strike the girl with the right front fender of the car. There was no way to avoid the impact. And suddenly they saw the car just cut right through the image of the girl. They felt no thud, no nothing. Whatever was left of that girl kind of turned into kind of a soft blur on the side of the road, and she was gone. And there's been so many other reports like that. The deacon from the Greek Orthodox Church across the street actually claimed that he had seen Resurrection Mary, or at least a girl, that disappeared in front of his eyes, kind of on a foggy night. Others have claimed, including a police officer, you might have heard the very famous story of the bars that were bent out there at Resurrection Cemetery in August the 10th, 1976. A man traveling past the cemetery saw what appeared to be a girl locked in the cemetery after hours. When he reported to Justice Police, Patrolman Pat Homa began shining his spotlight through, calling on his loudspeaker for the girl to come out to find a way to get her out. We thought it was just somebody who had been locked in the cemetery after hours. Nobody responded. He began shining his spotlight further around the bars, his flashlight, and he saw that several bars had pulled apart and bent. There were actually scorch marks and the impressions of fingerprints and skin texture as though somebody had seared their handprints into the bars. Now, there is so much speculation of what happened. People say, well, if she was a girl, she could have walked through. Sure. But I think what happened is that she was probably there doing that to leave a sign that she was still around. And the cemetery tries so many different ways to cover it up. Recently, they hacksawed one of the bars completely out. No explanation, it's gone. And I recently had talked to, I was out there recently. I hadn't visited I got my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, my mom and dad. Everybody's at Resurrection. I'll eventually be there. But I was out there. He was showing us, because I couldn't find somebody's plot and section numbers and so forth. He was very nice. After he closed off this mausoleum, he showed us around. And I just had to ask. I said, you've heard of Resurrection, Mary, haven't you? Oh, yeah. I said, do you believe it? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, you've heard of those bars, right? He goes, yeah, I've heard about that. And I'll tell you how that happened. And he right away went into the same spiel that was reportedly first televised on a week-long series called Ghosts and Curses by a very young cub reporter named Chuck Gowdy. This was when Faggy Flynn and Joel Daly was still on the air. So this goes back a ways. And they said that there was a front-end loader truck doing some sewer work that had backed into the bars. That's the same thing this guy told me. And I tried to go back and forth. I said, well, there were actually scorch marks on the bars, and there were fingerprints on the bars, and some of the bars were pushed in, other bars were pulled out, and the truck backing in would only push bars in and not pull other bars back out. And he had no explanation. He didn't really want to talk about it so much, but I tried to coax him into it because he was a nice guy. And I said, well, what happened to those bars? And he says, well, from time to time, the bars get rusty and we need to replace them. So most likely they hacksaw it out. I said, where is that section of bars? I would have bought that section of bars. I would have actually paid a price for that, because if you go to my website, I actually have, this was an interesting story too. I had a woman who was out there in 1976. Okay, this was after, I have pictures of several different, how the bars were initially found right up to present day on my website. After the cemetery had come out there to kind of obliterate the marks off with a blowtorch, they said they were trying to straighten them, which they actually did not at that time. She went out there with a Super 8 motion picture camera, color, no sound, and she filmed those bars, zoomed in on them and everything. We can actually see where those thumbprints, what those handprints used to be. Somehow she found out about me. She was going to put this on an eBay auction. And she found out about me and she said, well, I know you've been doing it for a long time. I'll give you first crack at it. Do you want this video? Yeah, of course I do. She said, I'll sign over the rights to you. It's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. And it was great because there were other interesting segments on there, including from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, from, I think, from St. Rita's Church, from Bachelors Grove, actually showing you when the fence was first put up around the cemetery, which was also 1976. And if you look at that, you can actually clearly see that this was not caused by a truck accident. And again, why would the cemetery go through so much expense and so much If they would have just let the story just kind of die out, it would have died out. But then when the cemetery takes all these steps to try to, what people say was trying to cover it up, that made people suspicious that it might have been caused by something paranormal. And if I could have bought those bars, I even told the guy, I said, if they're around, I'll buy them. Give me a price within reason. I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars for them. So I have a collection of stuff that I've collected from places I've investigated. So yeah, it's something that it could have been physical proof left behind by ghosts. We'll never know for sure.
And then we'll end here, Dale. I just two more questions. Have you ever been to the John Wayne Gacy house? And is there any place that you haven't been allowed in that's like your white whale?
Yes and yes to both those questions. I was actually, I wasn't in the John Wayne Gacy house. I actually was there after the house had been torn down. They weren't allowing anybody in there. I don't care who you were. But I was there with another individual, Richard Crow. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He'd been doing some mostly ghost tours and lectures. He was more of a folklorist, but he was a great researcher. And we went out there, and I was using my infrared film out there with two different cameras. I had one camera on a tripod with black and white infrared film, one camera on a tripod with black and white high-speed ordinary film, and I had cable releases. And I was snapping pictures, advance the film, snap the pictures to see what would turn up. If something shows up on both of them, it's most likely natural. But if it only shows up on the infrared and not the high speed taken the same instant, well, then you got something. And we got strange images of light formations on the property. Now, we know from what they had told us, and what I got every single newspaper article from the very beginning, John Wayne Gacy, right up to present day. The file's about that thick. And it talks about that they were going to dig up the property, the entire property, up to depth of 6 feet. Because there were bodies buried not just under his crawl space, under his foundation of his garage, a driveway, and then he actually threw some into nearby rivers when everything became out of control. That never happened. So maybe these lights that I captured are spirits that are still there, that are going to be, there forever. And eventually, there was a house built directly over that property. Now, people knew, when they got this property, they knew the story. They got it for a song and a dance, more or less, and they're living there. I don't know if there's anything going on there, but 29 bodies buried on the property that you're now living in. I mean, I don't know if I would be interested in that. I mean, as a paranormal investigator, that'd be a great place to investigate, but to live there, no, I don't think I'd do that. And your second question about, where I would like to go, is that what the question was?
Yeah, has there been any place that you've been kind of shut out of, like it's private property, they don't want anybody there? Have you ever been denied access to, a big-time ghost hunting spot?
Well, I won't say a big-time ghost place, but a lot of times we tried to get permission, to secure permission to go in places, and they just flat out say no. We were doing investigations this year in Gettysburg, and we wanted to investigate this place called the Daniel Laddie Farm, which was used by the Confederates and also by the Union Army as a field hospital. And there were a lot of amputations taking place. There was a lot of blood all over. In fact, they say that the building itself, you can still see the blood stains in the wood paneling on the floor. So we wanted to go in there and to do some investigating, or at least to be able to see it. And the barn is an area where they would throw these the limbs from the people they amputated, and also, stored some of the dead bodies. Very recently, and I think this was not about 2 or 3 years ago, they actually found a Civil War soldier still buried in there, which they finally took him out and gave him a proper burial someplace. So there was reportedly activity going on in both those buildings because, people lost their lives. They were suffering. Many were just dead on arrival there, and they were just storing them. And when I first contacted them, the woman said, "Well, we don't allow investigations in the building, but you can walk through. But you can you can walk around the bar and do whatever you want." It's okay, cool. Fortunately, we had to cancel that trip. We didn't have enough people, and then I tried to get back in this year when we went down, and I got just one sentence email that says we don't allow paranormal investigations anymore. Yeah, so there have been a lot of places that I would have loved to get into. I had a big list of places that nobody has been investigated before, and which I always think is great as a paranormal investigator to be the first ones in. Not so much for a feather in your cap, but just basically you're the first people in there to investigate to see what you're picking up as far as evidence there. And there are a number of places, unfortunately, cemeteries, homes, property that we have tried to get into, and we tried our best that we haven't been able to get in. Now, I have since that time partnered with a group called Afterlife Tours. I run my own ghost tours. I've been running them since 1982, called Excursions into the Unknown. They're the longest running tours in Chicago right now. But these Afterlife Tours, they do a lot of, somehow they're able to gain access into cemeteries at night legally. And they are master negotiators. I always thought I was a pretty good negotiator, but they put me to shame. So I partnered with them. I gave them some information of places I would like to investigate. And then they're going to be, of course, they was kind of curtailed this year because of the COVID. So maybe in 2021, we'll be able to, to investigate some of those places that we've been not so much locked out of, but we weren't quite able to negotiate to get in there to do something. We were even going to do some events there where people could join with us in a public investigation. Have a meal there, talk about the location, cut them loose, and then if they wanted to spend a little bit more money, they could spend the night there. This is actually a bed and breakfast, and it was kind of like a whole evening type thing. And unfortunately, we weren't able to put that together. However, we were able to. We were the first paranormal team ever to investigate Allerton Manor down in downstate Illinois, and great place. We were actually able to spend the night there. I actually had a couple of paranormal experiences myself. I was actually in the master bedroom of Robert Allerton, and I didn't know it at the time. And just as I was getting ready to go to sleep, I was still completely wide awake. I heard a female whimper in my room, sort of like a, and right away I jumped up. I'm wide awake now, and I'm looking around, nothing. I'm listening, hoping to hear it again, nothing. I later found out that I was in the master bedroom, but she slept down the hall. They didn't sleep in the same room, apparently. She had her own room down the hall, so I don't know what she would have been doing in that room. What I also found interesting is that I was able to, in my research, dig up a YouTube video from a gentleman who had been just hired as the night manager of that place, of Allerton Manor. He was brand new. He didn't know too much of the ghost stories. He was there to manage the place at night, nighttime manager. So they were going to give him a room to sleep in until they figured out permanent sleeping arrangements, and they put him in the same room, okay, the master bedroom. And he said he felt something rush over him in the middle of the night, and he felt that it was female. And my experience happened after that, and I later discovered that video after I already had posted my experience on my website. So it wasn't like I just copied something from somebody else's experience. So it kind of validates that there's something unusual going on in that room.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, and that's pretty cool that you were there first. So that's awesome. But Dale, thanks so much for joining us. Full of knowledge, man. That was just loaded with information. I really appreciate it. Ghostresearch.org is the website. Anything else you want to tell the people to check out before we sign off?
Sure. I mean, I do. I have authored 6 books on the subject. Windy City Ghost, Windy City Ghost 2, a field guide to spirit photography, a field guide to ghost hunting techniques, a field guide to haunted highways and bridges, and illuminating the darkness, the mystery of spook lights. They can all be found on my website. I also have a number of documentaries on there that I've done that are DVDs, including our segments on Ghosts Across America that can be found there. I also will be in the near future teaching some online courses on ghost research and ghost hunting, I guess you could call it, from all different aspects. There'll be Zoom meetings, Zoom events basically that you can tune into, and there's going to be an entire 8-week course that I'm setting up. People can buy the entire 8-week course or any portion thereof if they want to just learn about EVPs or equipment or photography or whatever the case may be. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook all the time. I have several pages on Facebook, one for my tours, excursions into the unknown, one for the Ghost Research Society, my own timeline, and then I have one set up, actually 2 others. I have one that says Ghost Research Society with Dale Kaczmarek, and then one for my books called the Ghost Research Society Press page, which you can also find information on that as well. People can email me simply at dale@ghostresearch.org, and I always answer all the emails, or they can just find me, browsing around on there. You can request to be included in the GRS page online on Facebook, and hopefully this year we probably won't be doing too much more. I'm still trying to get maybe a couple investigations set up for this year. Next year we're going to be in full swing. We hope to go to the Buddy Holly crash site in Clear Lake, Iowa, Noping Sanitarium up in Duluth, Minnesota. Hopefully go back to Gettysburg one more time. I got some interesting places I'd like to still check out and investigate. And we're looking at some other places, including maybe doing the Blixa X House and a few other places that I've not been to yet. So hopefully next year we can be more active than we were this year, but always try to stay as active as possible. But thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Definitely, yeah. Good luck with those ones too, Dale. Once again, thank you for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening. That's it for today. We will catch you next time.